Breaking news, the USA today. From this video you will know whether oil will come from Iran or not.
April. Now, the red bars here show Iranian-linked vessels as identified by BBC Verify. Now, this is approximate. There might be some Iranian-linked vessels not identified and some ships turn off their tracking data. However, you can see that Iranian-linked vessels clearly account for a considerable share of the vessels making the crossing. Now, shipping of oil from Gulf nations such as Iran has collapsed since the war began, as Iran has effectively closed the strait to them through threats. But Tehran has continued to allow ships carrying its own cargo through the waterway. Since the 1st of March, Iran has been able to ship around 58.7 million barrels, 1.5 million barrels a day. And analysts estimate that those oil sales have been earning the regime in Tehran around $139 million a day. And it's this source of earnings which Donald Trump is hoping to cut off to put pressure on Iran. Though it's worth noting that 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. On the one hand, this could induce Beijing itself to put pressure on Iran to negotiate and fully open the strait, but there are risks. Will the US seize or blockade Chinese tankers carrying Iranian oil, some of which have crossed the strait since the war began? And will the US Navy be able to accurately identify vessels that have been to Iranian ports? And will non-Iranian vessels, which the US wants to cross, be willing to travel through while this blockade is in place? There's also a clear risk to global oil prices. Earlier in this conflict, the US lifted sanctions on Iranian oil to try to keep down global oil prices. If this blockade is successful in removing 1.5 million barrels per day of Iranian oil from the global market, on top of the roughly 8 million barrels per day that have been lost due to the collapse in traffic through the Hormuz Strait, then the global oil supply crunch will deepen. That's why global oil prices jumped back above $100 after Trump announced the blockade at the weekend, and analysts say it could easily go higher, especially if Iran retaliates by resuming strikes on Gulf oil production facilities. So, while Trump hopes the blockade will put pressure on Iran, there are clearly big escalation dangers too.
So how exactly will the blockade work? Well, let's talk to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who joins us. Frank, I appreciate there's a lot that we still don't know, and we're learning more as the hours go by. But take us through the logistics of this.
Sure. Well, this is an extreme measure that is a reaction to another extreme measure, Iran's partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. What the US is doing is not blockading the Strait of Hormuz per se, even though it may have that ultimate effect. It's blockading Iran's ports. And you saw from the map there, all up and down, Iran has by far and away the largest coastline of any Gulf state, far bigger even than Saudi Arabia. And that coastline extends all the way out into the Arabian Sea. Down there on the bottom right, you can see the red and green dots of ships that are stuck both sides of it, of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the narrow bit. And how will this work in practice is that the US, I think, will be hoping, according to serving and former naval officers, to do a kind of repeat of what it did off Venezuela last year. Namely, it'll be boarding ships or diverting them, forcing them to stop. Quite difficult in the terms of a tanker, because they often take about 3 miles, 5 kilometers to stop or turn around. But they will be looking to drop troops, Marines by helicopter, that kind of thing. If any ship decides to run that gauntlet. Now, Iran has said that this is an act of, or this threat is maritime piracy. The same charge has been leveled at Iran for trying to choke off the Strait of Hormuz. Basically, it's a standoff. Iran doesn't have a conventional navy in the normal sense. Donald Trump likes to boast that they've destroyed Iran's navy, which is largely true, but Iran only has to have some special operations capability, namely a couple of torpedo boats tucked away in an inlet somewhere, a few drones. They're very easy to manufacture. You know, even some Chinese-made tiny little commercial drones packed with C4 explosive to be able to slam into the side of a tanker to make it too dangerous for ships to transit that strait. So it's a real standoff, this, between Iran and the US. Hidden in the shadows is going to be, I think, the